Saturn, with its famous rings and whopping 62 moons, has captivated the attention of all, but the latest research may shed light on our profound fascination. How far back does this fascination go in our history? What are the exact roots of this obsession? Is there activity on mysterious planet that we can probably solve? This documentary is going to dive into every aspect of the enigmas surrounding the famed gas giant. Let's first look at Saturn, the broadcasting system. Saturn is a gigantic broadcasting system that amplifies signals and electrical activity. These electrical signals travel to planet Earth and further create a wave matrix, which is the space we all occupy. Cutting-edge researcher David has determined the moon is a kind of projector that amplifies the signals and sends them to Earth. In his research, he's taken many natural phenomena into account and explained them using his theory. He's shown that the electrical activity and radio waves detected on Earth are transmitted from Saturn. Furthermore, scientific doctrines on Earth know about this and remain silent as their only method of response. Profound space scientists and astronomers have vindicated the theory recently, as a NASA spacecraft recorded radio signals from the celestial body. The signals were received from the northern and southern hemisphere of the planet, and both differ somewhat. The change in these signals can change every single thing we know about Saturn. The variations in signals can be attributed to the rotation of the planet, and they change dramatically with the changing of seasons. Scientists do agree to the fact that Saturn is an unusual planet, whereas the information they've received from Jupiter was always so straightforward. This feeds to the way the planets are referred to in ancient history, with Jupiter being the beneficent one and Saturn the maleficent one. The waves were recorded by the NASA satellite, which could pick up these eerie sounds, though not in the audible human range. They were later switched to a lower frequency and released online for some bizarre reason. Many curious listeners heard the audio, and one digital expert altered the pitch and tone of the signal to unveil what's become known as the message. It's believed by many that these waves were meant to communicate with the people of Earth. They're not just naturally occurring cosmic sounds, but created with a purpose. Those who believe that humans are not the only living species in our solar system are intrigued by these messages and believe them to be generated by an alien life form. We cannot call them man-made because we don't know what species made them. If Saturn is indeed a broadcasting system, then the signals sent by it are being transmitted by a living being or a higher power. In either way, Saturn is not what it seems to be, and there's enormous scientific evidence to support this claim. Evidence Saturn used to be a sun? Decades ago, we were taught all about the solar system. It was a remarkable feeling to know that the universe is home to planets other than Earth. Yet, little was known back then. Astronomy had quite a lot of outlandish theories out there about some of these planets. Saturn is one of them. Saturn is the sixth planet of the solar system and has been a subject of debate among the masses for years. Why is this so? Well, people argue about what the purpose of this planet and what its identity might be. Most of these bizarre theories stem from ancient literature. Some of them now have recent discoveries about the solar system that prove their point. One theory that's been circulating for quite some time now is that Saturn used to be a sun. The Saturn-Sun theory. There are a lot of ancient writings that have been found to validate this theory. These writings refer to the planet as the Sun. For instance, the planet was described as the ghost of a sun in Babylonian texts. Moreover, in the Maya, it's written that the sun of today is not the same as that of the olden days. Some might wonder if our ancestors were truly onto something, or if all of this was just a big confusion. After all, it was widely believed that the Earth was flat in the ancient days as well. That isn't enough of an evidence to suggest that it is. It just shows how limited the knowledge of mankind was back then. David Talbot discusses the authenticity of his theory in his book called Saturn, the Ancient Sun God. According to him, the entire theory might have been a product of some prevalent confusion. Moreover, there's evidence present in ancient literature that showcases the presence of the actual sun in the older days as well. As Talbot notes, there have been times in history when Saturn has been differentiated from the sun of today by naming it as the best sun or the central sun. There is a slight possibility that the people of ancient times merely misidentified the planet as the sun, but more likely they referred to Saturn as another sun. Backed up by fraternities. Supposedly, there are many fraternity groups among us that revere the sun as if it was the god. It's believed that most religions stem from this belief in one way or another. Saturn is heavily linked with such societies as well. It holds immense importance to them. If you were to believe that Saturn was just a planet, the importance given to Saturn seems out of place. However, if you believe the Saturn is sun theory, it all makes sense in every way. Did our ancestors have it figured out wrong? Or were they right when they dubbed Saturn to be the sun? Statistically, historically, and scientifically, evidence leans heavily to the Saturn-Sun theory. Immanuel Velikovsky's double star theory. Immanuel Velikovsky is a psychiatrist and scholar who's greatly known for his solar system work. One of his most famous books, Worlds in Collision, considered heretical by astronomers, explains more about the solar system than planetary science. This book gave rise to furious debates. Many of the scientists, theorists, and people in academia were opposed to the theories that he presented in his book. The opposition was so strong that it led to Velikovsky to lose his contract from his publisher, yet it didn't disprove his theory. The ideas that he presented in his book were mostly the interpretations of ancient texts, Old Testament, and other scriptures. As enraged as Velikovsky's opponents may be, many of his theories have, at least partially, proven to be correct. Decades later, his unorthodox theories have got the fame and vindication they deserve. One such theory proven to be true is the prediction of how hot Venus really is. Velikovsky was recently proven correct as the probes landed there and discovered it themselves. At the time, people who considered themselves masters of the field mocked Velikovsky on his concepts. Immanuel Velikovsky also explained that some of the planets, like Jupiter and Saturn, did not solely depend on the heat produced by the sun. Rather, these planets were capable enough to produce their own heat. This theory again was proven to be true. And also, it proved that some related theories might also be correct. For example, Saturn may have been a star. Velikovsky stated in his book that there is a high probability that the giant planets, Jupiter and Saturn, were part of a double star system. A double star system suggests that two planets or stars become a pair and form a binary star. And not only do they appear close to each other, but they also start moving in a mutual orbit and have a strong gravitational bound. These stars may appear as one single star if seen through naked eyes. Well, if this was true, and Saturn and Jupiter have been orbiting so close to each other, their gravitational forces might have distorted each other's atmospheres. However, as Velikovsky's work was the interpretation of ancient texts and scriptures, and in ancient history Saturn was of great importance, he stated that Saturn might have been much larger than Jupiter. He also argued that Saturn might have been closer to Earth. These controversial theories in his book were justified with time, and in many cases they provided guidance and reference. As many of Immanuel Velikovsky's theories have been proven to be correct, it can be expected that Saturn and Jupiter might have formed a double star at some point in the history of our outer space. The era of modern technology might support the ideas of Immanuel Velikovsky as they keep making new discoveries. However, the theory of the double star system has yet to be accepted. Intense electrical activity in Saturn's rings. According to the researchers of NASA, Saturn's rings consist of small pieces of comets, asteroids, or broken pieces of moons. These rings are also made up of billions of pieces of ice and dust-coated rocks. The rings have particles that can be as small as the tiny dust particle or as huge as a house. Some of the particles are even as gigantic as mountains. Each of these orbiting rings circle at a different pace around Saturn. The rings also have a range of 175,000 miles, that's 282,000 kilometers, from Saturn's surface. How can electrical activity be present in Saturn's rings? The information mentioned above are the findings that are factual and proven through extensive research. However, Voyager 2, a spacecraft launched by NASA in 1977 in order to study the outer planets, encountered a strange event. It was said that as Voyager 2 began to make a constant pop sound as it flew over one of the major rings of Saturn. It was later revealed to be throbbing waves of powerful energy. Upon more research, these powerful bursts of energy were then told to be crackling, lightning-like discharges of electricity in many research papers. An experiment was also held which named the Planetary Radio Astronomy Experiment. This experiment also is said to have detected distinct bursts of powerful radio emissions in small intervals. The radio emissions were called the Saturn Electrostatic Discharges, SED. Dr. Joseph Romig, who was one of the members of Voyager astronomy team, claimed that the bursts of energy were 10,000 times more powerful than the lightning that's experienced on Earth. He also held that each of the bursts of the charge was from around 100 to 1,000 megawatts. This kind of energy is enormous. To make a comparison, the amount of energy is 3 times the output of a typical electricity generation plant. He did also state the interactions with surrounding dust particles were the reason behind these strong electric charges. So, what conclusion did they all reach? Strangely enough, there was no such fact-based clarification that was ever provided for this unusual electrical activity. In fact, some years later in 2016, some vague explanations surfaced. These theories were even more bizarre than the previous. Saturn links to Nibiru. In ancient times, it was believed that a Nibiru is a star that shepherds all the other stars like sheep. The Sumerians also say that there exists a 12th planet which is called Nibiru. According to an ancient table, Nibiru is known as Marduk's star, which was made to be visible by the gods in the heavens. About the appearance of Nibiru, it's said that it seems to have wings when in the sky. In a book series named The Earth Chronicles, the existence of Nibiru was discussed at length. In this book, the author wrote a great deal about the history of the Earth and also the history of mankind. Author Zechariah, who is a leading journalist, has studied and gained command on the knowledge of both the modern and ancient Hebrew. Zechariah had also studied some other very ancient languages. He was also proficient in the Old Testament, history, and archaeology. As he was one of the few scholars who were able to read, understand, and interpret Sumerian language, his books had a lot of information that was the interpretation of text written on the clay tablets by the ancient civilizations. His book, The Earth Chronicles, therefore states that the winged appearance of Nibiru was due to the formation of oxide clouds that were caught in the atmosphere of the planet. It also explained that this was the reason the wing structure appeared as Saturn came into its orbit. For some reason, Saturn was claimed as Nibiru. This unusual claim might have risen because someone who was not so aware of all the information had considered the rings of Saturn as the wings of Nibiru, as the ancient text suggests. They might have related the presence of wings as the rings that surround Saturn. This can be a conceptual error or just the urge to witness the discovery of Nibiru. What does the recent study have to say about this claim? In recent times, Nibiru is also known as the Planet X, and there are a lot of theories that the researchers suggest regarding it. Yet none of these say that the Nibiru is Saturn itself. Modern researchers have passed the theory based on scientific evidence that there might exist another planet, supposedly Planet X, somewhere further in the solar system. The orbit of this planet is far more extended than that of Pluto. It's deduced from the research that Planet X might be 10 times bigger than our planet Earth. However, all these researches and findings are far from suggesting that Planet X, or Nibiru as the ancient text suggests, might be Saturn. As the research for Planet X or Nibiru is still in process, there's also a belief that the planet may now be the recent Planet 9 discovery, smashing the Saturn notion. Naturally occurring radio waves of Saturn. Over the years, a lot of genius and unusual theories have been put forward about Saturn. Some claim that the planet is home to more bizarre activity than the other planets combined. Science finds ways to peer deeper into these discoveries. One bizarre science discovery regarding Saturn was the presence of naturally occurring radio waves in Saturn. The backstory. NASA, with the help of its Cassini probe, recorded the occurrence of radio waves coming from the atmosphere of Saturn. These sounds that were being emitted from Saturn could not be heard by the human ear. Therefore, NASA transformed these sounds into such a range that it can be heard by humans. Then they released it online for the world to hear. According to NASA, these radio waves are naturally occurring. However, how and why they were produced by the planet is still not known. As soon as the discovery was made, various people tried to decide what the recording meant. A digital audio expert by the name of Joost van Dyke took up the challenge to make sense of it all. He changed the pitch of the recording to better understand what it was trying to relay and to detect anomalies that could help them solve the mystery. Upon multiple listening sessions, he detected a pattern in the waves. In layman's terms, this meant that the radio waves were not naturally occurring and instead were intentional and a way of communication. As soon as the word intentional communication hit the internet, a lot of other people jumped on board. There is now a huge consensus that there is serious activity on Saturn. Many people decided to play their part in trying to translate the message. One person decoded the message as, "You people are urged to drop the earthly impulse." We're not sure what to think of this. The bizarreness doesn't stop there. When it comes to radio signals in Saturn, it's safe to say that things have been quite weird. This wasn't the only time radio signals were observed. Instead, over the years, there have been instances of abnormalities in the radio signal generated. NASA found out that the signals coming from Saturn differed the southern and northern hemisphere. The variations in the signals have also changed a lot. However, these variations have remained in sync with the season of the planet. Whatever the radio signals mean, the fact remains that Saturn on the weirdness chart is exponentially upwards. Did Saturn cause the flood? Velikovsky claimed that Saturn and Jupiter were the reason behind the flood. Emanuel Velikovsky was a Russian scholar and the author of various books. Most of his books are regarded as highly controversial. In one of his controversial books, Worlds in Collision, which is also a US bestseller, he discussed that Saturn and Jupiter caused the flood. In his book, Velikovsky stated that Saturn and Jupiter moved from the orbits and came a little too close to each other. He explained that this closeness between both cosmic giants brought some massive tidal effects into each other's atmosphere. The complex movement of such huge bodies would have led to exceptional activity. Immanuel Velikovsky said that after this, both Saturn and Jupiter did come back to their original position in the orbits. However, the occurrence of this led to a series of events that finally caused the flood on our planet Earth. Although as credible as it may sound, if we take this claim to be true, it takes us to many other questions that are unanswered. If it is the movement of these gigantic planets that caused the flooding, then Anunnaki would have certainly known. Anunnaki, as described in the ancient Sumerian text, were a group of gods. They were also known to include the 7 gods that decree. According to many other ancient texts, the Anunnaki were aware of the movement of the planets and stars. They would have known that the movement of Jupiter and Saturn would cause such a flooding on Earth. It's astounding that today scientists say that planets may have a say in the climate of Earth. A study has proven that every 405,000 years, the gravitational forces of Jupiter and Venus slowly affect the Earth's climate. Due to this, the Earth experiences change in its environment and habitat. The change in fossils, elements, climate, animals, and so forth can therefore be justified according to this theory. Amazingly, this study shows a chance that the drastic movements of Saturn and Jupiter might have caused the flooding on Earth. You never know that some plausible claims of the past that we think are totally redundant can turn out to be true. The Black Cube, hidden world of Saturn. In ancient times, the deity El was referred to as Saturn and symbolized by the planet. This forms a connection between the cult that worships the Black Cube, which is a symbol of Saturn, Satan, or El. During the time of the ancient Greek and Roman civilizations, Saturn was worshipped as a deity, and a negative energy perspective associated with the planet was passed on through the ages. Saturn was always known as the malevolent one, while Jupiter was the benevolent one. Saturn is also associated astrologically with the limitations of human beings, such as disease, decay, and death. The Black Cube and intelligence community has deep links to Saturn, which is owned by some of the most powerful people on the planet. The Black Cube is the symbol representative of Saturn. The theory states that the belief system was passed down over centuries through a network of secret groups. This is the same group of people that overshadows the business, religion, and politics of the modern world. This is exactly why the Black Cube symbol is found outside buildings owned by the business elite. Their point of view is that these symbols are not there for decorative purposes, but depict a secret message that's only understood by those part of the group. The megahex theory further states that the cube represents the dimensions of a cosmic anomaly. The black Saturn is also deeply associated with the color black, coupled with the cube geometry, adds to the Black Cube theory. In ancient times, the planet Saturn was considered the farthest planet from the Sun, and because it was so far away, none of the Sun's light fell on it. The celestial body is cold and unforgiving, which is the basic principle of divine malevolence. The horned deity is also represented in ancient paganism, and the deity is represented by the planet Saturn. This creature that is half goat and half man is the ancestor of modern-day Saturn worshippers. The phrase Pan, the great horned deity, had signified the rings of Saturn, and it also associated with the half man, half goat, because Saturn is the throne of Capricorn, the goat. Saturn is associated with destructive deeds, and the secret group that holds the planet in high reverence as they receive spiritual illumination from it. Saturn is also the opposite of everything that is good, and the communities that use that symbolism in their literature are purported to exploit that angle. The multitude of Saturn symbols on Earth. You might think it a coincidence, but there are many prominent companies from around the world whose logos are inspired by the rings of Saturn. The sheer quantity is beyond statistical coincidence. If you notice the symbol of the Internet Explorer, the letter E has a ring on it, which is a nod towards the ringed planet. Other logos, such as Toyota and Boeing, also use the same ring, and even the swoosh logo for Nike seems to be an incomplete ring. One other example of this symbolism is the logo for the Axis Media Group, which is an image of a sphere with two rings around it. Other than logos, the concept of exchanging rings at wedding has also been borrowed from the planet. In ancient times, it symbolized paying respect to the god of Saturn. But the question remained, why are there so many tributes to Saturn? And why was the ringed planet worshipped since the beginning of time? One theory states that it has everything to do with the occult, and there's evidence throughout history that supports this belief. Saturn is associated with a heavy and dark energy since always, and many people argue that even the name is very similar to the Dark Lord himself. The ancient civilizations believed that this planet was the farthest from the sun and received no natural light. The environment there was considered a cold and unforgiving, like the nature of evil. Saturn has a ruthless spirit which is very powerful, which is why it's revered as a deity and worshipped to seek success and riches. In older times, people looked to the stars and considered them a higher power. Saturn was one of them, and according to occult lore, this was the ruler of Atlantis. Saturn is believed to be the patriarch of all forthcoming kings and leaders. The legend has been passed down through generations, but the people who believe in it are limited now. There are so many symbols that are associated with the deity, and they point to the significance of it all throughout history. With the advent of monotheistic religions, the worship of the evil gods was only limited to occult circles. However, the importance of Saturn, or the Lord of the Rings, is still prominent in present culture, but it's only visible to those who have their eyes, ears, and mind open. There are many references to the ringed planet throughout popular culture as well. Many stars subscribe to the private organization of the Black Cube and harness its powers to push their careers forward. There are many theories that point to a specific group of people that worship Saturn, controlling the economy, politics, and media.